Some products know exactly what they are. Take the Singer SU6 for example. That's a digital to digital converter, that's all it does, and it does it really well. Other products branch out a little bit, like the streamers from Eversolo. There's streamers, DACs, music servers, and even DSPs to some extent. All of those features make sense together, and they're handled pretty well. And then there's the FiiO K19, which does many things. It's a DAC, it's a headphone amp, it's a DSP, it's a preamp, it's even a digital to digital converter. It has a mains power socket, but it can also accept an input from a linear power supply if you've got one that'll produce 15 volts and 3 amps, which I don't. But it's clear that the K19 is very versatile and it's packed with features. It's also very confused. When I saw the specs and features of the K19, I was really excited. It looked like a killer desktop solution for users of headphones and speakers. At $1,300 US, it offered what I expected would be an outstanding DAC based on past experiences with products like the K9 Pro ESS. Attached to that is a THX AAA 788 Plus headphone amplifier stage, which I figured would be solid. I don't always love the sense of energy and dynamics from FiiO amps, or more to the point, the lack of energy and dynamics they sometimes have. But they're normally pretty solid, and with 8 watts going into a 32 ohm load from the K19, and still having 1.1 watt going into a 300 ohm load, it looked to me like the K19 would drive pretty much anything, and we'll talk about that more a bit later. Those two features on their own are solid, but definitely not worth $1,300 US. However, when you also offer a powerful, dedicated digital signal processing or DSP chip into the K19, now you've got a powerful 31-band parametric equalizer, as well as the ability to control dynamic range. So you can enhance it, you can compress it, you can limit it, and that's something you don't see in consumer audio devices kind of ever. Now, the K19 was looking really interesting. It's also compact. I think it looks really cool. It's got HDMI input and HDMI ARC. That's not I2S, it's just HDMI in case you want to use the K19 for gaming or video watching purposes. And it's got Bluetooth as well, including all the high quality codecs, except for the brand new emerging lossless ones, but all of the regular LDAC, aptX HD, etc., that's all baked in there. On paper, the K19 looks like a brilliant device. When I set it up on my desk, my expectations were all reaffirmed. I really enjoyed my interactions with the K19. I'd go so far as saying it was one of, if not my most favourite, FiiO product for quite some time. When I compared the K19's internal DAC to the Geshelli Labs J2S AK4499 version running the Sparkos Labs op amps, in other words, one of the best DACs you can buy for about half the price that you'd spend on the K19 was absolutely holding its own against the J2S. It couldn't quite match the sense of layering and depth that the J2S delivered, because the K19 does produce a flatter, more left-right or two-dimensional soundstage, but the resolution and detail and general quality from the K19 are excellent. The J2S pulls ahead slightly with its sense of three-dimensionality, because that also gives a sense of scale and presence and weight to each sound within the soundstage. And then the other thing that's different about these two is they've got a slightly different character to their sound as well. The K19, with its slightly more forward sound, produces a character that's a little bit crisper. It's like the clarity's been dialed up just a notch or two. And that's not saying it's actually resolving more detail, it's just got a sharper attack to the sound that's not harsh or aggressive, but it's a little bit more etched, you could say, than something like the J2S with the Sparkos op amps. Some people will prefer the K19, others are going to prefer the J2S. It's going to be entirely personal choice. And so in short, the K19 is another outstanding DAC implementation from FiiO. And then we get to the amp. And that's actually brilliant too. No more blunted character to the delivery of the sound, robbing the amplifier of its sense of dynamics and energy. The K19 is crisp, dynamic, and highly resolving. And that's regardless of whether you're driving a low impedance planar magnetic headphone or a high impedance dynamic driver headphone, or anything in between. It can even drive the Modhouse Tungsten headphones if you put it in maximum gain mode and crank it up a little bit. It's not the best I've heard the Tungstens, but it's impressive nonetheless. Comparing it to the Geshelli Labs A3 Pro headphone amp, and the K19 once again holds its own. In both cases, I've compared the K19 to Geshelli Labs products because you could buy yourself a J2S and an A3 Pro, and you're going to end up spending about the same as the K19 but getting a separate DAC and headphone amp. That's of course assuming that you don't need the DSP features that the K19 has. The Geshelli Labs is brilliant for its price, and so in my opinion, it's the competition to beat if you're spending this much money. Once again, like with the DAC, the A3 Pro does offer better depth and layering in the soundstage, although this time, the slightly flatter presentation from the K19 will actually impress some people more. What that flatter presentation tends to do is bring details to the forefront, so a sound that would otherwise be lingering over at the back of the soundstage from the A3 Pro is brought forwards to you with the K19. In my opinion, it's a little bit less natural, having musicians that would be standing in different kind of layers of the soundstage, all sounding like they're standing in one row at the front of the stage. That doesn't appeal to me so much, but I know that many people love it because it brings all of that detail right up front for you to enjoy. And so the K19 is also packing an excellent headphone amp. I also like the fact that you can plug in multiple headphones at once and drive them all at the same time. Just be careful if you're running one headphone that needs lots of volume and another headphone that doesn't need too much volume. Speaking of the different outputs, it's also worth noting that there is a slightly different sound between the balanced outputs, that being a 4.4mm and a 4-pin XLR, both are available. Those are a little bit different from the 6.3mm single-ended output. Using the 6.3mm output brings in the size of the soundstage a little bit, and it kind of focuses things more in the center of the image. So you get a bit less sense of separation of sounds, and it comes across a touch less resolving and a touch less detailed as well. On the other hand, it also makes it a bit smoother, and that could be a benefit for some headphones. For example, the Focal Utopias, I probably enjoy slightly more from the 6.3mm output on the K19 than I do from the balanced outputs. Ultimately, both outputs are excellent, they're just different. And so when it came to critical listening and comparisons, the K19 was impressing me even more than I expected. It proved to be a really solid addition to any desktop chain that I could think of, especially given that you can use the USB input on the K19 to use its internal DAC, its headphone outputs, etc., but then also take a coaxial and or an optical lead out of the K19 and send it off to another DAC using the K19 as a digital-to-digital converter or a DDC. What that essentially means is that you can daisy chain a couple of DACs. You can run first into the K19 via USB-C, and then daisy chain a coax and an optical for two other DACs should you want to. I know that's not a feature that everybody's going to use, but I thought it was really cool. I love the versatility, and so I thought we were onto a real winner here. And then the cracks started appearing. You see, there are lots of things about the K19 that just don't feel like they've been thought through. They feel a bit undercooked. And it took my experiences with the K19 from being surprising and exciting to being a little bit clumsy and confusing. Let's start with the orientation. Most of the marketing for the K19 shows it standing vertical like this, and that's how I used it for most of the time. It's also cool that it comes with a little plastic piece that goes over the top and turns it into a headphone stand if you're going to use it in the vertical orientation. What's not so cool is that if you want to use it in the vertical orientation, there are a couple of stickers, 4 in total, on the bottom side here, or the side here. And we remove those to attach the stand. It's a cool stand, by the way, FiiO, nice design. What that means though is that unless you're good at keeping stickers handy somewhere without losing them, or losing their stick, or getting them covered in fluff and dust, you're going to end up with 4 holes permanently in the side of your K19 if you ever want to run it horizontal and take off this stand. It's not a big deal, of course, but we're just getting started. Next is the fact that if you do want to run it horizontally, the labels for the dials are now all on their side. It's pretty much unavoidable, but it bugs me just a little bit. The final thing to talk about when we're talking orientations is that the menu system gives you 4 different ways that you can orient the display. And that seems unnecessarily confusing. If you're running it vertically, you can only really run it one way. You can't stand it that way, so why have a display that's essentially upside down? And then if you're going horizontal, you can choose to have it horizontal this way, according to the display, or this way, according to the display. The problem with that is, the labels on the back are only done in one particular orientation, which is this way. So there's seemingly a right side up and an upside down, but the display orientation doesn't indicate that. I think it would have been easier if FiiO had just helped people understand which ways are the two options, being a vertical option and a horizontal option, and taken away the other two choices. Again, this is all relatively minor stuff, you're not going to have to deal with it regularly, but that's also not all. Because then we get to the control knobs, and no, I'm not harking back to the orientation of the labelling of the control knobs, I'm talking about the way they turn, and that is that they turn the wrong way. Actually, they turn both ways, but the point is, to go down through the menu system, instead of turning clockwise, which is intuitive, you have to turn them anti-clockwise. And so unlike every other product ever invented, if you want to scroll down through the menu on the FiiO K19, you have to turn the knobs backwards. Or if you want to have them turn the right way, or let's call it the more intuitive way, you have to set up the FiiO K19 upside down. And again, the orientation of the screen does allow you to do that, but then all the labelling on the back of the device is upside down. And that still doesn't solve the problem if you're running it vertically. Now, all of this probably sounds a little bit petty or a little bit picky. It's all stuff that you can absolutely get over and you can still enjoy the K19. But I'm sharing it all with you because it tells the story of the K19, or perhaps the story within the story. Shall we continue? Let's say you've got the K19 set up on your desk. It's in vertical mode, which is how I would actually recommend running it. It works beautifully like that. You plug in your headphones and you go to select the gain mode required. Only, which one do you choose? Because there's 5. I love having the ability to run IEMS and difficult headphones from the one device, but this is honestly a bit ridiculous. No one will ever need 5 gain steps. It's almost like FiiO couldn't decide which particular levels of gain to put in there, so they just threw them all in. Once again, not a huge deal, but it makes the gain steps or the gain levels a little bit misleading. For example, high gain on the K19 is really low or medium gain on most products. Using something like the Focal Utopia on the K19, in high gain I still have to use about 50% volume to get moderate listening levels around 75 to 80 decibels. On any other system, that's a low gain output level. And what that means is that if you get the K19, it's going to take you a while to figure out which gain level you actually need for your earphones or your headphones. And for some people, it can be a psychological barrier to run a device like this in its ultra gain mode. It might feel like you're overstretching the device, which you're not, but it can feel that way. As I said, it's a psychological barrier for some people. It's like driving down the freeway in 3rd gear with your car revving its head off. So where to next? Let's talk about output options. FiiO provide excellent control over which of the outputs you're using. So you can run your headphones from the internal amp of the device and run the preamp outputs to a set of active speakers. You've got full volume control over your headphones and full volume control over the rear outputs. Let's say instead, you want to run your headphones from the front output of the K19 and then maybe take the rear outputs off to a different headphone amp. Maybe you've got a nice tube amp you want to pair up with it. And so you want to enjoy the solid state headphone output from the K19, which is excellent. And then when the mood strikes you, you want to unplug from the K19, plug into your tube amp and enjoy the music. Nope, not happening. At least not easily. The only way to make that happen is that in addition to swapping over where you're plugging your headphones in, you also have to manually go into the menu of the K19 and switch it from the phone out mode into the line out mode. Unlike FiiO's excellent R7 streamer, DAC and headphone amp device where there was a hardware dial to change the output, in the K19 you've got to go through their clumsy, unintuitive, backwards turning knobs menu system to make that change every time the mood takes you to switch over to an external amp. Or you can change over to the headphone and pre-out mode, but that means that when you go from the K19 headphone output to your external amplifier, you've got to max the volume on the K19. And that's a bit of a problem because A, it can take quite a while of turning to get to maximum volume, but also B, when you then come back from the headphone amp to the K19, you're running a risk of blowing your headphones and or your eardrums. On top of that, the gain mode is active on the pre-outs, so if you're not in the maximum gain mode, you're not going to be getting the maximum volume fed out to your external headphone amp, and that could mean that you have to turn your external headphone amp way louder than you normally would and introduce things like distortion, noise, etc. To be clear, I really like the design and the sound and the features and the general performance of the K19. I think it's fantastic. but the interface is just clumsy and poorly thought through, and it can kill the enjoyment of living with a device like the K19, at least for me. And so this might be sounding like a failed product, and it's really not. It's just a product with some major design quirks. But the performance is absolutely fantastic, and we haven't discussed its third main feature yet, and that's the DSP. Before we get to the DSP, I do want to mention that I touched on the fact that you can use the K19 as a DDC or a digital-to-digital converter. For those wondering like I was, the K19 is not quite as good of a DDC as something like, say, a Singer SU6. The sound quality from the K19 is fine as a DDC, but comparing the K19 as a DDC to the Singer SU6, I noticed that the downstream DAC gave a deeper sense of bass, a slightly more refined sound, and a better sense of separation and resolution with the Singer as the DDC. I'm putting that down to the fact that the Singer SU6 has got some really high quality temperature controlled clocks in it. It's also potentially isolating noise better from the system. And so the K19 isn't bad, but if you're looking for a dedicated DDC type setup to maximize your sound quality, then it is worth going with something like the SU6. Still, it's cool to have the versatility in the K19. Speaking about versatility though, let's talk DSP. And the first thing I should mention is that those digital outputs we were just speaking about in DDC mode, those don't get the benefit of the DSP. So everything I'm about to talk about is only if you're running the analog outputs from the back or the headphone outputs on the front. The K19 runs a powerful ADI ADSP 21565 DSP chip, and that gives you precise control over the frequency response coming out of the K19 as well as its dynamics. So you've got a fully customizable 31-band parametric equalizer with 10 customizable presets as well as a bunch of preloaded ones. And what's really cool is that you can hear the adjustments in real time, so it's a great way to understand exactly what your EQ adjustments are doing and to tweak it to get it just right for your personal preferences. But EQs aren't particularly unique or special. We can get EQs through apps on our phones, apps on our computers, portable devices have them now. That's not that special. Having 31 bands is kind of special, but you probably don't need 31 bands anyway. But where the DSP in the K19 does get special, if you want to get into this sort of thing, is dynamic range correction. If you connect the K19 up to a Mac or a PC with a secondary dedicated USB cable, so in other words, it's not the same connection that you're already using for your DAC, it's a separate USB-C connection. If you connect that up, you now have access to a very powerful view on your PC or your Mac that allows you to play with dynamic range enhancement. You can use a compressor or you can use a limiter. Now essentially what those three things are doing is that the dynamic range enhancer is going to do some things to expand the dynamic range of the music, or potentially you can put it into negative. I haven't tried that, but either way it's an overall dynamic range adjustment. Or you've got the compressor, which is going to bring the difference between quiet sounds and loud sounds closer together. That's going to make everything come across louder. Or you can go the other way and use a limiter, which is going to prevent the louder sounds from being too loud. There are lots of different ways that DSP controls like these can be used. Honestly, I would probably never use them for music listening purposes. I know some people might. Where these could be particularly useful though is if you're doing any kind of editing, mixing, mastering, production, and you want to use a K19. This could be pretty cool for that. And indeed, FiiO's DSP app on the Mac or the PC does give you ways to actually visualize in real time exactly what your adjustments are doing. You need a way to feed the output from the K19 back into some sort of interface that takes the sound back into the computer. But if that's a setup that you need, the K19 can do it for you. So that's super duper powerful. You can also control the DSP via FiiO's smartphone app, although as far as I could tell from playing around, there's no access to the dynamic range controls, it's only for the EQ. That app also gives you access to adjustments of things like the lighting schemes on the control knobs on the K19. It's a really handy app that opens even more versatility with the K19. And so the FiiO K19 is a bit of an enigma. It's immensely capable and versatile with excellent overall sound quality. But it's a bit like a genius who's absent-minded and unfocused. Extremely capable at what they do, but sometimes a bit frustrating to work with. If you don't mind a bit of a fiddle, and you want a really versatile and capable desktop solution that looks fantastic, you should still definitely consider the K19, but go into it with your eyes open. Put some links down below so you can check out the K19 for yourself and decide if it's a fit for you. For now, I want to say a huge thanks to channel members, Patreon members, and to those of you that leave super thanks on videos. And if you are in the market for an impressive all-in-one desktop solution, I've linked another review up here that I think you'll be interested in. For now though, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.